1871. Somewhere in the western Pacific, a typhoon takes a trading ship apart, and the sea washes what's left of an Irish-American captain named David O'Keefe onto the beach of a small island called Yap. The islanders pull him from the surf and nurse him back to life. And as he recovers, O'Keefe starts to notice something strange about his hosts. They are not poor. They farm, they fish, they feast, they trade. But their money is stone. Great carved wheels of limestone with a hole through the middle, standing along the paths and outside the houses. Some small as a plate, some heavier than anything a man can lift, heavier, in fact, than a delivery truck. And this money worked. It had worked for centuries, longer than any money in your pocket has existed. The man they saved from the ocean was about to kill it. Not by stealing it. Nobody on earth could steal it. He killed it by doing something far stranger. He made more of it. So, how does stone money work? First, there is no limestone on Yap. Every one of those wheels was cut from a quarry on another island, across miles of open ocean, and brought home on rafts and canoes. The biggest stones took hundreds of people to move. Getting one new stone was the work of a whole community. Dangerous, slow, and expensive. And once a stone arrived, it did something no money does. It stopped moving. Forever. A stone was set down in the open, by a path or a house, where everyone could see it. And when its owner wanted to buy something big, no one strained a muscle. The owner simply announced, in front of the town, that the stone now belonged to someone else. And everyone knew. That's the whole system. No banks, no paper, no locks. You couldn't steal a stone because the town's memory, not the stone, was the money. The anthropologist who visited Yap at the turn of the century tells the story that says it best. One family on the island was known by all to be rich because of a magnificent stone lying at the bottom of the sea. A storm had sunk it, generations back, on the voyage home. It didn't matter. Everyone agreed the stone existed. Everyone agreed whose it was. And so the family stayed wealthy. A coin nobody would ever see again, still spending, because the money was never really the stone. The money was what everyone knew about the stone. Stone money held its value for centuries for one simple reason. The pile could barely grow. Add up every stone on Yap. The work of generations. Now ask how many new stones the strongest crew could bring home in a year. A trickle. What existed always dwarfed what could be added. And that is why a stone bought the same feast in your grandfather's day as in yours. Then a half-drowned sea captain got healthy. O'Keefe had recovered, looked around, and seen a fortune. The island was covered in coconuts, and the world's soap and candle makers paid well for coconut oil. All he needed was the islanders' labor. They said no. They were, by every account, perfectly content, and his foreign coins meant nothing to them. There was nothing he had that they wanted, except one thing. O'Keefe sailed to Hong Kong, came back with a large ship and a cargo of explosives, and went straight past Yap to the quarry island, where Yapese crews had spent months coaxing stone from the cliffs with shell tools and sweat. O'Keefe blasted. Wheel after perfect wheel, cut in days, loaded by winch, delivered across the sea. He offered them as payment, stones for coconuts. And the island split. The chief saw it instantly. The way the book tells it, he saw what most trained economists still miss. He banned O'Keefe stones. They were worthless, he ruled, because they came too easily. Only stones earned with the sweat and blood of the Yapese were money. But others on the island looked at the gleaming new wheels and took the deal. Coconuts flowed to O'Keefe. Cheap stones flowed to Yap. And every new stone made every old stone worth a little less. The pile that could barely grow was growing fast now, and the town's memory couldn't fix that. Savings that had held for generations began, quietly, to leak. Within a lifetime, O'Keefe's stones and the industrial world's machines behind him, stone money was finished. The stones still stand on Yap today. Beautiful, ceremonial, and no longer money. Ammous hangs the whole book on that ruling. A money that is easy to produce is no money at all. Yap was not a one-off. The same thing happened, slower and far darker, in West Africa. For centuries, across that region, the money was glass, small treasured beads, strung into necklaces and bracelets, passed down as wealth. And it was good money there, for exactly the Yap reason. Where glassmaking was rare and costly, nobody could flood the market with beads. Then, in the 1500s and 1600s, European ships began arriving, from a continent where glass was cheap. The traders noticed what the locals prized, and they filled their boats with it. The way the book tells it, they packed the hulls with beads by the barrel. What followed wasn't a raid. It was slower and worse. Every cheap bead bought something real: crops, ivory, labor, lives, and cost its buyer nearly nothing. Bead by bead, year by year, the region's savings drained into the hands of the people who could make the money. And the beads themselves earned a grim name that history hasn't forgotten: slave beads. A collapse you can see coming is a tragedy. A drain you can't see is how a whole society gets robbed politely. And the sea itself told the story a third time, faster. In early America, colonists adopted the local shell money, wampum, even made it legal tender. Then boats got better. Shells got easy to gather by the ton. And within a generation, the law gave up on them. Cattle and salt, the two oldest monies of all, are still hiding in your paycheck. Pecuniary comes from the Latin for cattle. Salary comes from the Latin for salt. Everything, everywhere, has been money. Almost nothing has stayed money. Why? Because anything people use to store their savings becomes a prize. And a prize invites everyone on Earth to try to make more of it. So the only money that survives is money that is hard to make. And the test for hardness is one comparison: how much of it exists against how much of it can be made this year. Stone money before O'Keefe, centuries of stock, a trickle of new, hard. Stone money after the explosives, easy. Beads in Africa, hard until the ships came. Shells, hard until the boats improved. The moment technology makes a money cheap to produce, that money is already dead. The only question is how long its holders take to find out. The chief of Yap, standing on that beach, understood the cruelest part. When money goes easy, the people who make it get rich. O'Keefe, the bead traders, whoever owns the machine. And the people who saved it pay for all of it, without ever making a bad decision, without ever being robbed in any way they could point to. Choose an easy money, and your savings become someone else's payday. That's the trap. And humanity spent thousands of years testing its way out of it. Stones, shells, beads, cattle, salt, copper, iron, silver, and technology kept winning. A better boat, a hotter furnace, a stick of dynamite, another money dead. Which leaves a question, and the entire ancient world, on every continent, went looking for the answer. Is there anything nobody can cheapen? Any substance on Earth that stays hard, no matter the century, no matter the machine? There turned out to be exactly one. It doesn't rust. It can't be grown, brewed, bred, or built. Every scrap of it ever dug up is almost certainly still sitting in someone's hands. And yet, with all our engines and all our chemistry, humanity has never once managed to swell its supply by more than a sliver a year. Next time, why gold won? And so you don't think this is ancient history? The story of two Texas billionaires who bet a fortune against the lesson of Yap in living memory and lost $1 billion learning it. Texas, 1979. Nelson Bunker Hunt and his brother William are sitting on oil money. More money than most people can picture, and they have decided the dollar is no longer a safe place to keep it. The 70s have made that fear easy to understand. Prices are jumping. Paper savings feel less solid every month. The brothers do not buy a little silver. They buy the metal itself, by the vault load. Bars, contracts for delivery, a huge share of the silver anyone can find. Their wager is straightforward. If enough people stop trusting dollars and start wanting silver, the price will rise. If the price rises, more people will want it. The Hunts will be holding the metal everyone wants next. For a while, the room rewards them. Silver climbs from $6 an ounce to $50. On paper, the brothers are up billions. A silver spoon in a kitchen drawer starts to look less like cutlery and more like a check someone forgot to cash. That is when the bet meets the rest of the world. Mines that were barely worth working become busy again. Scrap dealers offer cash for candlesticks, trays, old coins. Anything stamped silver. People who had no reason to sell at $6 suddenly have every reason to sell at $50. The Hunts are trying to make silver scarce while the price is paying everybody else to bring out more. The price breaks. The brothers lose more than $1 billion. Their mistake was not that they picked the wrong ticker or mistimed a trade. They tried to turn a metal with an elastic supply into a place where savings could sit still. The island chief on Yap understood the problem a century earlier. If the money gets valuable, someone will try to make more of it. This episode is about the one metal that proved unusually hard to do that to. Put copper in the Hunt's place, and the mechanism becomes easier to see. A billionaire decides copper will protect his fortune. He sends buyers into the market. The price rises before they have finished buying, and that rise looks like proof he was right. But the copper has not become rare. It has become profitable. A higher price calls labor, machines, fuel, and capital toward the ground. A mine that did not make sense last year makes sense now. A deposit that was too awkward to reach gets another look. The world's copper is not a fixed pile in a locked room. It is a very large amount of rock waiting for a high enough price. Eventually, the buyers who were holding copper as money need to buy other things. Some sell. The market does not return to the old price with the old amount of copper. It returns to a market with those savers' stockpiles and all the extra metal their enthusiasm paid the miners to produce. The late buyers are left holding the expensive part of the story. The transfer is plain once the trucks start moving. Savers bid the price up. Producers expand. New supply arrives. The people who wanted copper to store their wealth have financed a great deal of copper production instead. Nobody needs to call a meeting for this to happen. The price is the invitation. A mine foreman sees overtime worth paying for. An investor sees a new pit worth financing. A scrapyard sees metal worth sorting. Each decision is ordinary on its own. Together, they turn a private attempt to save in copper into more copper than the savers wanted. That is the test. A thing can become more valuable when people save in it, but it cannot be a reliable store of value if its makers can answer by flooding the market. Set the two piles beside each other. What already exists, and what can be made this year? Copper's second pile can swell. Gold's usually cannot. Gold has an advantage that begins before money. It survives. It does not rust into nothing, rot in a warehouse, or disappear when a tool has done its work. A bracelet can be melted into a coin. The coin can be melted into an ingot. The metal keeps going. Much of what people dug out of the ground thousands of years ago is still above ground, in jewelry, vaults, drawers, and crowns. That gives gold an enormous first pile. It is not one year's harvest. It is the result of generations adding a little metal, and almost none of it leaving the human world for good. The second advantage is less romantic. Gold cannot be manufactured out of cheaper materials. Alchemists spent centuries promising that they could do it. They never did. To make more gold, someone has to find ore, move rock, separate a very small amount of metal from it, and do it again as the easy deposits run out. The work does not end when the price rises. A richer vein may still be deep, distant, or expensive to process. A new mine may take years to plan and build. Gold can reward the people who dig for it without giving them a quick way to remake the whole monetary stock already sitting in other people's hands. For decades of reasonably good records, all the mines on Earth together have added only around 1.5% to the existing stock in a year. Even if a higher price somehow doubled the annual output, the old pile would grow by roughly 3%. The people holding it would notice very little change. Run the Hunt brothers bet one more time. A rush into gold makes mining more attractive, and more mining happens. But the new metal arrives as a trickle beside everything people already own. A rush into copper calls out a flood. That physical difference, more than a slogan or a king's decree, is why gold kept winning the saving contest. Silver comes close, which is why it was money for so long. It is valuable enough to carry in a pocket where gold would be too much for a small purchase. But silver tarnishes, industry consumes it, and the world can add to its stock much faster. Once paper claims could handle small payments, silver lost the job that had protected it. The Hunts were betting that second place was close enough. The supply response said it was not. Rome gives the argument a human scene. Julius Caesar's aureus contains about 8 grams of gold. It travels from Britain to the edge of Persia, and for roughly 75 years, the coin holds its weight while the Republic becomes an empire. A merchant can inspect it, weigh it, and know what is in it without trusting the latest speech from Rome. Under Nero, the palace finds a cheaper way to spend than asking people for more taxes. Collect the coins. Melt them. Put the emperor's face on new coins with a little less gold. Spend the difference. The first reduction looks small. 8 grams becomes 7.2. Later rulers take more. 6.5, then 5.5. The number stamped on the coin has not changed, but the metal inside it has. Bread and other goods do not multiply because the palace has made lighter coins, so prices rise. The rulers answer with price orders. A merchant who sells at the legal price can lose money on every loaf, so the merchant stops bringing bread to market. In the book's telling, city people who can no longer buy food move out to land where they can grow it. The Roman citizen becomes tied more closely to the local lord and the local harvest. Rome fell for many reasons, and historians still argue over them. Ammous's claim is that the shrinking coin ran underneath the rest. A state that can quietly take value from its own money has found a way to spend before it has persuaded anyone to pay. In the East, Constantine's successors strike a different answer. The solidus contains 4.5 grams of gold. Generation after generation leaves the weight alone. A merchant in Constantinople does not have to guess whether the coin in her hand has been shaved since last season. The coin outlives the rulers who issued it. Traders call it the bezant and carry it beyond the empire. The Islamic dinar follows the same standard of weight. Long after Rome's western markets have broken apart, a familiar gold coin still lets strangers trade across language, border, and generation. Eventually, Constantinople's rulers begin the old trick too, and the slow weakening of the coin returns. But the long run matters. Gold does not make a city virtuous. It gives ordinary people a measuring stick that lasts long enough for savings, contracts, and trade to stretch beyond the next ruler. Florence picks up that measuring stick in 1252 with the florin. Workshops strike a small, consistent gold coin. Venice follows with its ducat. Within a few generations, more than 150 European cities and states are minting to the Florentine standard. A trader who has earned something valuable no longer has to turn it into land, livestock, or a favor owed by a lord before winter. He can save a coin whose weight will still mean something when he opens his hand again. Banks grow around that trust. So do workshops, routes, and cities. The book gives money a large role in the story of the Renaissance. The smaller, harder fact is enough for this moment. A standard coin let people who had never met plan farther ahead together. A Florentine merchant could leave home with a coin another city recognized, settle an account without hauling a chest of mixed metal, and keep the remainder for the next season. The standard did not remove risk from trade. It removed one needless question from every trade: whether the money itself had changed while it was out of sight. Gold wins the old contest because it is hard to destroy and hard to make. It is not a perfect everyday money. Pay someone across an ocean, and the payment can sink, be stolen, or take months to arrive. Buy bread with a gold coin, and the coin is too valuable. Let a king run the mint, and the same old temptation waits beside the die. For centuries, gold, silver, and copper divided the work among themselves. Gold carried large savings. Silver handled smaller purchases. Copper reached the market stall. Their relative values moved, rulers interfered, and every cross-border payment meant metal had to travel with guards. Then two inventions changed the physical problem without changing the metal underneath it. The telegraph let banks send a message before a ship could cross the sea. Railways linked the cities that had once been days apart. Paper receipts, bills, and checks could move while the gold stayed in a vault. That solved gold's problem with distance and small purchases. It also set up a new danger, because somebody now controlled the vault and the paper. Before that danger arrives, there is one astonishing moment to see. New York, 1889. A young reporter walks up a gangway with one small purse. She is about to go around the world. Every port will take her money. November 1889. A pier on the Hudson River. A 25-year-old reporter named Nellie Bly walks up a gangway with the clothes on her back, one sturdy handbag, and a challenge from her newspaper. Beat the hero of the novel around the world in 80 days for real. She will do it in 72. Steamship to England, train across Europe, down the Suez Canal, Ceylon, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, across the Pacific, and home by rail through a snowbound America, alone, at speed, in an age before passports were even standard. The remarkable thing is not that the route is possible. Steam and rail have made possible things that would have sounded like sorcery to Bly's grandparents. The remarkable thing is the little bag at her side. A traveler can cross 12 borders, step off at a strange station, hand over money, and be understood before she says a word. In her handbag, English gold coins and Bank of England notes. Nothing else. One kind of money, and it's spent in every port on earth. A dockhand in Colombo, a hotelier in Hong Kong, a rail clerk in California, all taking the same gold without a second look. They do not need to know Nellie Bly. They do not need to trust her newspaper. They need only recognize what stands behind the paper and inside the purse. The coins have a known weight. The notes are claims on the same thing. That shared recognition turns an exhausting negotiation into an ordinary purchase. No traveler before her century could have done that. No traveler since 1914 has been able to do it either. Bly circled the planet inside a brief, strange window. The one time in history, the whole world ran on a single money. This episode is about how that window opened. And at the end, about the flaw that was waiting to close it. Gold came out of the last episode with two flaws unsolved. Too heavy to move. Too precious for bread. For most of history, there was no way around them. A payment meant metal changing hands, however far the metal had to travel. A merchant who wanted proof that a distant customer could pay had to wait for a ship, a messenger, or the coin itself. Then, inside one lifetime, two machines rewired the world. At a country bank, a clerk taps a telegraph key and asks a question of a bank hundreds of miles away. Does it hold the gold? The reply comes while the customer is still at the counter. On a rail line outside, a strongbox can move the other way. Not across an ocean every afternoon, but cheaply and safely, whenever the accounts finally have to be settled. The railroad could move anything, including gold, across a continent. And the telegraph could move something better than gold. Information about gold. A bank in Manchester could now confirm, in minutes, that a bank in Hamburg held the metal. The metal stopped traveling for every small transaction. It sat in the vault, and paper traveled instead. Banknotes, checks, receipts, each one a claim on gold, sitting somewhere reachable and provable. That is a subtle change in daily life. The person buying flour does not carry a shaving of precious metal. The merchant does not weigh it. A note passes over the counter. Its usefulness comes from an invisible chain. Paper to bank, bank to reserve, reserve to a known amount of gold. As long as that chain can be checked, the light thing behaves like the heavy thing. Paper solved the bread problem too. A note can be printed for any amount, large or small, so the centuries-old need to keep silver and copper around for small change fell away. Silver, remember, was the floodable metal, the one the mines could always make more of. The moment paper could stand in for gold at every size, silver's last job was gone. Britain had led the way long before the machines arrived. In 1717, a man running the Royal Mint, a physicist named Isaac Newton, who took the job as seriously as he took gravity, fixed the pound to gold at a rate that held, with one wartime pause, for almost 2 centuries. That is what an anchor looks like in practice. A scale in a mint, a number written down, and people deciding that tomorrow's pound will mean the same thing as today's. British trade grew up on that anchor. Once the railways and wires connected the rest of the world, copying it looked less like an experiment and more like joining the busiest road. The stampede began with a war. In 1871, Germany won its war against France and demanded an indemnity in gold, payment for defeat, and the asset everyone already wanted, then used that gold to join Britain on a full gold standard. France followed, and Holland, Switzerland, Belgium, the Scandinavians. Each switch made the next switch more urgent. Money is a network. If most of your suppliers price contracts in one thing, if the ships arriving at your docks settle in one thing, and if the banks on the other end of the wire keep reserves in one thing, standing outside becomes expensive. The map did not change because a committee liked the color gold. It changed because the countries already inside made the connection more useful. By 1900, some 50 nations were on gold, and even the holdouts used gold coins in the market square. A merchant could convert a British pound into a French franc with the same confidence that a carpenter converts inches into centimeters. The units differed. The metal under them did not. Not everyone switched. India stayed on silver. China stayed on silver. As the West monetized silver, the metal's price began a fall it never recovered from. In a household that had saved in silver, that was not an abstract quotation on a faraway exchange. It was the slow discovery that the same pouch bought less when it met the wider world. Foreigners holding gold could buy up silver-priced land and labor at a discount that grew every year. By the time India switched its backing to gold in 1898, its silver had lost over half its value. China held on until 1935 and lost more. Ammous argues that a real part of why those two great civilizations spent the next century catching up to the West traces to that one monetary wound. Your money can be hard at home and easy abroad, and if it is, the abroad wins. Europeans called the Era la Belle Epoque, the beautiful age, and the numbers underneath it were almost comically simple. A British pound was 7.3 grams of gold. A French franc was 0.29 grams. Exchanging one for the other was not a prediction about where currencies might go next. It was arithmetic, like converting inches to centimeters. For a merchant, that changes the shape of a promise. He can sign a long contract with a supplier on the far side of an ocean and know what every payment means before the cargo leaves the harbor. He still has weather to fear, ships to insure, and customers who may not pay. But the money itself is not another moving part. There are no currency markets to watch every morning. No exchange rate crisis hidden inside the price of the order. The city that grew around those promises was loud with practical new things. A tram gathers workers from farther out. A telephone operator connects people who used to wait for a letter. An electric elevator turns height into usable space. Film flickers onto a screen. A surgeon has instruments and a laboratory that could not have been built from one good season's profits. By Ammos's count, the era invented much of the modern world. The automobile, the telephone, the elevator, the underground railway, recorded sound, moving pictures, powered flight. Indoor plumbing and central heating reached ordinary homes, the two inventions that did more against disease than most of medicine. Heart surgery, blood transfusion, the electrocardiograph, ideas that needed years of quiet work before they could help anybody. His explanation is not that a gold coin itself invents a telephone. It is that money which holds its value makes people more willing to save. And oceans of patient savings can pay for railways, laboratories, and inventions that take decades to come good. The claim is about time. A society that can carry work forward has more room for projects whose reward arrives after the people who began them are gone, and it reached all the way down. At the end of a factory shift, a worker could put a pair of gold coins in a tin for his children, then close the lid and leave it on the kitchen shelf. The tin held its worth, not for a year, for a generation. Ordinary people could carry their work forward through time. That, more than the airships and the opera houses, is what the beautiful age meant. But the paper had a price. For it to work, the gold had to gather. A coin leaves the kitchen tin because a family deposits it. The country bank sends part of its reserves onward because other banks must trust it. A strongbox rides a train to a capital. By the century's end, coins that had once moved hand to hand were pooling in a few dozen rooms on Earth. The gold standard no longer meant much gold in people's hands. It meant gold in bank vaults, then the vaults of each nation's central bank, with paper promises circulating above it. In calm weather, that arrangement is wonderfully efficient. One coin can support a great deal of trade, because the coin does not have to be handed over every time a payment happens. The catch is in the word calm. A paper claim is useful only because its holder believes it can become gold when asked. Banks learned that, on an ordinary day, only a few people came asking at once, so they could issue more claims than they held metal. Carefully, quietly, and mostly, they got away with it. The entire machine used confidence to economize on the thing confidence was supposed to guarantee. Britain, whose notes the world treated as good as gold, kept reserves that were a small fraction of the paper bearing its name. A clerk could still answer the wire. A shopkeeper could still take the note. But the true test of a promise is not a calm afternoon. It is the morning when everybody decides to ask at once. Last episode ended with the die in the king's hand. This system was better, and it was also the same thing, one step removed. The king's die had become the banker's vault, and the whole shining machine now rested on a promise. The paper is as good as gold, so long as the men with the keys choose to keep it that way. Gold, the book says, had no way to force them to keep it. It could only trust. For 43 years, the promise held. The beautiful age did not fade. It stopped, inside a single summer. In June 1914, an archduke was shot in Sarajevo, and within weeks, the great powers of Europe were mobilizing against each other. At garden tables, people still spoke as if the old world would restart after a short interruption. Wars were nothing new. The gold standard world had seen them, fought them, and settled them quickly. Every government in Europe assumed this one would be over by Christmas too. The newspapers called it a summer excursion. But mobilization is not a short interruption when every government needs more than it can raise in ordinary taxes. Armies need food, steel, trains, ammunition, pay. And a government cannot promise all of that while leaving every citizen free to walk into a bank and demand the gold behind the notes. One by one, the belligerents did something with no precedent in the era. Each government walked to its own vault, the vault holding its citizens' pooled gold, and reached for the key. Next time, Christmas Eve, 1914. In the frozen mud between the trenches, German and English soldiers climb out, shake hands, and play football. If the men fighting the war wanted it over by Christmas, why did it run 4 more years? Christmas Eve, 1914. The Western Front is 5 months old, and already a scar of mud and wire runs from the North Sea to Switzerland. After dark, British soldiers hear singing from the German trenches, carols, in German, to tunes they know. Lanterns appear along the enemy parapet. A few British voices answer. Men who have spent the day watching one another through rifle sights are now calling Christmas greetings across the mud. By morning, against orders on both sides, soldiers climb over their parapets and walk into no man's land. They approach slowly, hands visible. Then there are handshakes. Cigarettes, buttons, tins of beef change hands. Some German soldiers had worked in England before the war and speak English. They ask after London and tell the British where they had lived. On several stretches of the front, somebody produces a ball. The ground is pitted by shells and stiff with frost. There is no referee, no proper pitch, and not one grand official match, just soldiers kicking a ball between the lines where they had been killing one another the day before. The truce did not end the war, and it did not reach every trench. Officers broke up meetings. Artillery resumed. Some units never stopped fighting at all. But it reveals something the communiques conceal. Given one unguarded morning, many of the men doing the fighting chose to bury the dead, swap souvenirs, and play. 5 months earlier, newspapers had promised them a short triumphant war, home by Christmas. The generals had believed it too. Instead, the war ran 4 more years. It killed millions, toppled 4 empires, and left historians arguing over what the sacrifice achieved. The war began for reasons larger than money. But after the first confidence, the first volunteers, and the first treasury had been spent, what kept every army supplied long after the men in the mud had shown how easily they could stop. Within weeks of the first shots, every major power at war made the same decision. Britain, Germany, France, Austria, each suspended the right to redeem paper notes for gold. The notes in people's pockets looked the same on Monday as they had on Friday. What changed was the promise behind them. Before the suspension, a banknote was not merely money by decree. It was also a claim. Bring enough notes to the counter, and the bank was supposed to hand over a fixed weight of gold. That right put a physical limit under the paper. A government could issue more promises, but if trust weakened, citizens could arrive with the notes and empty the drawer. In August 1914, notices went up on bank counters, and the drawer went downstairs. The vault doors closed. Hardly anyone protested. There was a war on, and it would be over by Christmas. That suspension changed the ways a government could pay. It could tax, taking money openly. It could borrow by selling bonds, asking citizens to exchange savings for a promise of repayment. Or it could spend the gold and cash already in its treasury. Each route has a visible limit. Taxes cause resistance. Lenders can say no. A reserve eventually runs out. Once redemption is suspended, there is a fourth route. The government can create more paper claims, even though the metal beneath them has not grown. The first new notes buy uniforms, food, steel, trains, and shells at yesterday's prices. Only later does the public discover that more notes are competing for the same goods. The cost instead arrives as rising prices and a falling exchange rate, spread across millions of households. Nobody receives a bill marked your share of the war. A baker sees flour become dearer. A family sees the weekly envelope buy less. Officials can blame hoarders, profiteers, bad harvests, or the enemy before anyone blames the printing press. Historians count many engines behind the 4 years: alliances, nationalism, conscription, industrial weapons, and governments unwilling to accept defeat. Ammous's claim is about the fuel. Printing let each state keep purchasing men and material after ordinary finance would have forced a harder political choice. The measuring stick survived next door. Switzerland stayed neutral and remained tied to gold, so the Swiss franc held comparatively steady, while the belligerents' currencies fell against it. By the armistice, German money had lost about half its pre-war value against the franc. Austrian money had lost roughly 2/3. The armies had consumed more than taxes and bonds admitted. The rest had been collected from every pocket that held paper. Germany lost the war, and the victors presented a second bill, reparations, on top of debts accumulated during the fighting. The government owed more than its damaged economy and tax system could deliver. It kept the machinery that had carried it through the war running. It kept printing. At first, a falling mark looked like one more hardship among many. Then, in 1923, the arithmetic went vertical. Prices doubled in days, then in hours. A figure painted on a bakery board in the morning could be wrong before the queue reached the door. Factories began paying wages twice a day. A wife or husband waited at the gate for the morning envelope, then ran to the shops before the money died by evening. The important skill was no longer saving or comparing prices. It was speed. Buy anything useful now, because waiting until tomorrow was a financial decision all by itself. The photographs look absurd because the numbers had broken their connection to ordinary life. Bundles of notes filled baskets and wheelbarrows. Children made kites from money. Families fed notes into stoves when the paper cost less than the fuel it could replace. A billion-mark note could be worth less than the sheet on which it was printed. But the comedy ends at the savings passbook. Debtors escaped because the paper value of what they owed collapsed. Owners of land, machinery, and inventories still held things. People paid close to the moment they earned could sometimes keep running. The people with no escape were the careful ones. Clerks, widows, pensioners, and families whose gold had become banknotes in 1914. Imagine the black tin from the last episode on a Berlin kitchen table. The coins are gone. The bank accepted them years ago. In their place is a passbook, its copperplate entries recording decades of work. The balance can now buy one loaf, perhaps not even that. Germany had not merely spent the coins. It had broken the promise that made the paper behave like them. A society that watches prudence punished and speculation rewarded learns something poisonous. People stop believing that patience and rules protect them. Anger goes looking for a culprit. Ammous places the political extremism that rose over the next decade partly among inflation's children. Historians give the later Depression and many other forces greater weight. The ruined passbook belongs in the story without pretending it explains the whole one. America's turn came in peacetime, and it came through the radio and the post. In 1933, an executive order required Americans to deliver most monetary gold, coins, bullion, and gold certificates, with stated exceptions, to a bank or the Federal Reserve in exchange for dollars. A family could read the notice at the kitchen table, open its own savings tin, and take the coins to the counter because keeping them had become a federal offense. The official exchange was $20.67 for an ounce of gold. The following year, after most private monetary gold had been collected, the government reset the official price to $35 an ounce. The ounce had not changed. The number of dollars assigned to it had risen by roughly 2/5, reducing what each dollar represented. Then the Second World War moved much of the world's gold toward the United States, as countries paid for supplies. At Bretton Woods in 1944, the Allied powers designed the arrangement meant to follow the war. The dollar would be fixed to gold at $35 an ounce for foreign monetary authorities. Other currencies would fix themselves to the dollar. For an ordinary American, gold redemption had already disappeared. For a foreign central bank, it remained the foundation of the new system. A French or German authority accumulating dollars was supposed to be able to present them to the United States and receive gold at the official rate. One country held the metal. The rest of the system held its receipts. The design contained a tension. A growing world economy wanted more dollars for trade and reserves. The United States supplied them by spending and lending abroad. But every additional dollar held overseas was another potential claim on a gold stock that did not grow with the paper. The system worked only while foreign governments preferred the receipt to the thing behind it. America financed wars and large domestic programs. Dollars multiplied while the official gold reserve did not. European authorities could read the ledgers. France began converting dollars and shipping gold home. A famous retelling gives the job to a warship under de Gaulle, though the real withdrawals were a broader official policy. West Germany considered following. By the late 1960s, foreign dollar claims had grown far beyond the gold the United States was prepared to deliver at the fixed price. The historical problem was not an empty vault. It was that the promises outside the door had become larger than the reserve behind it. On Sunday evening, August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon interrupted the nation's television schedule. Families watching summer programs saw a desk, flags, and a president announcing controls on wages and prices, a temporary import surcharge, and one line that changed the world's money. He had directed the Treasury to suspend the conversion of dollars into gold, temporarily. The suspension has now lasted more than half a century. The announcement closed what people called the gold window, the right of foreign monetary authorities to exchange official dollars for American gold. It did not remove coins from American pockets that had happened decades earlier, and it did not reveal an empty vault. It ended the rule that forced the United States to settle its international paper claims in metal. After that Sunday, the dollar no longer represented a fixed quantity of gold. The currencies connected to it lost that anchor as well. Exchange rates could move against one another, and each national money rested primarily on law, taxation, central bank policy, and confidence in the institution issuing it. The promise of a promise had become a system of managed promises. For thousands of years, money had ultimately been a scarce object, even when paper stood in front of it. In 1971, the world's central monetary system crossed into something different. No physical redemption limit, and no material that a note holder or foreign government could demand at the counter. Researchers Steve Henke and Nicholas Kruss counted 56 modern episodes of hyperinflation, collapses severe enough for prices to double within weeks. Weimar is the image everyone remembers, but the list continues through different continents, governments, and ideologies. Money tied to gold or silver failed in many other ways. Banks failed, economies suffered depressions, governments changed the rules, and access to the metal was never equal. A redeemable commodity standard did not produce this particular runaway spiral. The book notes, because the supply of the monetary thing could not be multiplied at the speed of a decree. Modern central banks usually aim for something gentler, prices rising slowly rather than exploding. Managed well, the change is easy to miss from one year to the next. Managed badly, the distance between a wage and a loaf can open in a season. In both cases, the unit is designed to change through policy, rather than remain a fixed weight of something outside politics. One physical detail survives the transformation. The governments that ended gold redemption did not treat the remaining metal as rubbish. Central banks kept large reserves in guarded rooms, and many still regard gold as an asset that owes no payment to another government. The public story says currency no longer needs the metal. The institutional behavior says the metal can still be useful when promises meet other promises. War finance broke redemption. Reserves concentrated, and money eventually carried no claim beyond the issuer. The chief on Yap had refused stones made too easily. The supply of modern money could now be changed directly by policy. Easy money, the book argues, does not stop at prices, savings, or war. It changes how far ahead people look, what they build, what they eat, even how they understand themselves. Next time, a quiet room at Stanford, a child alone at a table, one marshmallow, and 15 minutes that predict a life. Stanford University, California, near the end of the 1960s. In a plain room sit a small table and a small chair, and in the chair sits a child of 4 or 5. On the table, on a plate, one marshmallow. A psychologist named Walter Mischel has just made the child an offer, and it is a simple one. You can eat it whenever you like. But he's about to step out of the room, and if the marshmallow is still on the plate when he comes back, there will be a second one, and the child can eat both. 1 now or 2 later. The door closes. 15 minutes. Some children eat it before the door has finished closing. Some go the distance, and the ones who make it mostly do it by fighting themselves. Hands sat on, eyes covered. The chair turned around to face the wall. Mischel kept the names. Decades later, he tracked those children down as adults, and his follow-ups found that the ones who had waited had, on the whole, done better in school, scored higher on their college exams, carried less weight, and fallen into fewer addictions. Ammous teaches this experiment in every economics course he gives, calls it the most important lesson his field has to offer, and marvels that most economics departments never mention it at all. The two piles are back, what exists, against what can be made, Except this time neither pile is gold. One pile is you, today. The other is you, in 10 years. And something in your pocket has been coaching you, your whole life, on which pile matters more. What that room measured has a name. Time preference, the rate at which you discount the future. In plain words, how much extra does later have to pay you before you'll turn down now? Michel's children set their price at 1 marshmallow for 15 minutes. Every adult sets a price too, and nobody's price is zero, because the future is only a promise. You have to survive the present to collect it. The price varies enormously from person to person, and the book's claim is that this one number, more than talent or luck or charm, quietly runs a life. The evidence is scattered through any ordinary week. Take the overtime shift, or the night out. Take the job that pays now, or the training that pays in 5 years. Buy the reliable used car, or sign the loan on the gleaming one. Study every week of the semester, or cram the night before the final. Ammous's favorite version, the one he gives his own students. Nobody grades any of this from outside. The one who pays for now and the one who collects later are the same person. By the book's count, you trade with other people a few times a day, and with your own future self dozens of times. Morning to night for life. And nobody enforces these deals. No contract, no court, no witness. The person who pays for a broken promise to your future self is your future self, and he can't sue. Ammous argues that a lifetime of those inner trades ends up weighing more than most of what the world ever does to you. And his exhibits sit at both ends of the scale. Gifted athletes who earned fortunes and died broke, and ordinary people on ordinary wages who saved for 40 years and left their children a better start than they got. Ammous tells it as two fishermen on the same beach, starting with nothing but their hands. Harry fishes 8 hours a day, eats what he catches, and sleeps. Tomorrow will look exactly like today. Linda fishes 6 hours, eats a little less than she'd like, and spends the last 2 hours of daylight on an object nobody can eat, a fishing rod. For a week she is, by choice, the hungriest person on the beach. Those evenings pay her nothing, and the rod may never work at all. That risk is baked into every plan aimed at the future, and it's why waiting has to promise a reward before anyone sane will wait. The rod works. The next week, Linda pulls twice Harry's catch from the same water. She could cut back to 4 hours a day now, eat exactly like Harry, and rest. Instead, she fishes 4 and builds 4, and the building hours become a boat. A month in, she's out in deep water, hauling up fish Harry has never seen in his life. Feeding herself now costs her 1 hour a day. Everything after it flows into better rods. Then nets, then a bigger boat. Run the two families forward. If Harry's children fish the way Harry fished, they inherit his day. 8 hours, bare hands, dinner, sleep, for as many generations as the line lasts. Linda's children inherit a boat, a set of nets, and the habit that built them. And each generation's tools take longer to build than the last, and catch more than the last. The parable has a real-world ending. There is a ship working today called the Annelies Illinga, the largest fishing vessel on Earth, a floating steel factory that took decades to conceive, finance, and build before she was finished in the year 2000. No day's catch could ever have paid for her. She was built on money set aside by people who knew the payoff was decades away, and she'll spend decades more paying their patience back. She is Linda's choice, compounded across generations. And by Ammos's telling, so is everything else with walls, every workshop, power plant, laboratory, and hospital stands, because somebody, somewhere, caught dinner and didn't need all of it. The price you charge the future is not a fixed piece of your character. It moves with age, with circumstance, with what the world around you does to people who wait. Fear moves it first. Where war or crime can take everything overnight, only a fool plans for next year. The future gets cheap when it isn't safe. Insecure property pushes the same way, and so do heavy taxes, skimming the reward off waiting. Ammous adds one more pressure to the list, and it's the one you handle every day. The money itself. Nearly every deal with your future self is carried by money. Save, and you are handing today's work to a person years downstream, a stranger. In most ways, you will never meet him. He can't thank you, and all you really know about him is that he'll need what you send. The money is the courier. In episode 3, the courier was a kitchen tin of gold coins, and it delivered. A workman's wages crossed a whole generation and arrived whole. Waiting cost nothing, so ordinary people waited. The old courier's record is long. In the year 301, the Emperor Diocletian had maximum prices carved in stone across the Roman world. Run his numbers through gold into modern money by the book's arithmetic, and a pound of beef in the year 301 came to about $4.50. A pint of beer, about $2. Olive oil was the luxury, near 20 a pint. 17 centuries later, dinner priced in gold costs roughly what it cost then. The new money makes the opposite promise, in public. The banks that manage it state the goal outright. A little inflation, always, money designed to shed a sliver of its value every year on purpose. That redraws every trade with your future self. The courier now takes a cut, so waiting is charged for. Borrowing collects a subsidy because the money you repay is worth less than the money you took. It's the same table and the same two piles, one now or two later, but somebody has adjusted the payout for waiting and adjusted it downward. Ammous argues the arithmetic is the small half of it, because the habit doesn't stay in the bank. A person whose money rewards waiting starts pointing everything at the future, the training, the marriage, the reputation, every deal that only pays off years from now. A person whose money punishes waiting learns the opposite lean, one shaved sliver at a time. Nobody sits you down and says any of this. Money that holds value teaches patience. Money that melts teaches you to spend. The half-century since the world went off gold reads like the results coming in. In 1970, the 7 biggest Western economies saved nearly 13 cents of every dollar they earned. By 2015, it was under 3.5, the book's own tally, a fall of almost 3/4 inside one working lifetime. Across the same stretch, the ordinary Western household went from owing almost nothing to owing more than a year's income. The borrowing changed character along the way. Lending, for most of history, meant building. Money advanced against a harvest, a ship, a workshop. Linda, borrowing to finish the boat. By the book's telling, the new era invented something else. The credit card and the consumer loan, borrowing for dinner itself, with no boat anywhere in the plan. Even the wealthy, Ammous notes, now borrow against their fortunes rather than spend within them. He files the era under a farmer's phrase, eating the seed crop, and grants that a society can eat it for years without noticing a missed meal. The taste shows up in ordinary plans. A century ago, a family expected to pay for a house, an education, or a wedding out of what it had put away. Today, the book notes, that sentence sounds like a fairy tale, and the normal way to buy a future is to borrow it. One country makes a tidy control group. Switzerland kept its franc tied to gold until 1934, and kept vaults of it behind the franc into the early 1990s. And the Swiss went on saving in double digits, while the rest of the West slid into single digits, and in some years below zero. None of this happened by accident, and none of it happened in secret. Money that melts was an idea before it was a policy, argued into place by men who believed the melt would save the world. Their case was serious. Money that sits still in tins does nobody any good, and a slow melt keeps it moving, keeps factories humming, keeps the breadline short. The most famous economist of the 20th century made that case, and made it brilliantly. Against him stood a school that swore the melt was the disease itself, dressed as the cure. Between them, they split the century, and one side won nearly every government on Earth. Next time, an earthquake flattens the world's biggest copper mines, and within minutes, on screens everywhere, one number moves, with nobody in charge of moving it. The century's great fight was over that number, whether anyone should be allowed to set the price of money. Before dawn on the 27th of February 2010, one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded tears through the coast of Chile, the country that digs up more of the world's copper than any other. Mines are damaged. So is the port that ships their copper out. Within minutes, on screens in every country on Earth, one number moves. The price of copper, up 6%. Nobody ordered that. No committee met, no announcement was drafted. The price simply moved. And then, all over the planet, strangers who would never hear the word Chile that morning started doing exactly the right thing. A factory manager who found copper suddenly dearer postponed an order and looked for substitutes. Mines on other continents, seeing the same number, dug faster. Wreckage on one coastline. And within days, the shortage was being filled from everywhere. The price was drifting back down, and the extra revenue was helping the broken mines rebuild. Nobody was in charge. Everybody obeyed. Ammous builds his 6th chapter on that morning, and on the question underneath it. If one number can organize the whole world's response to an earthquake, who should be allowed to set a number like that? For the last 100 years, the biggest fight in economics has been about exactly one price. This episode is that fight. The morning in Chile is an old idea wearing modern clothes. In 1945, the economist Friedrich Hayek published a paper, 11 pages, still read today, arguing that the hardest problem in economics isn't deciding how to share things out. It's that the knowledge needed to decide is scattered across millions of minds, and it cannot be gathered. The mine engineer knows what the flooded shaft can still produce. The factory manager knows which orders can wait. No office anywhere can know it all. A price, Hayek argued, is the answer working itself out in public. Everything all those strangers know, squeezed into one number that tells you exactly what to do about it. The factory manager never needed to hear about the earthquake at all, because the number carried everything the earthquake meant for him. The paper traveled. Decades later, a man read it, took its core idea, that scattered knowledge beats central genius, and founded Wikipedia on it, an encyclopedia written by everyone and run from nowhere. And the same idea, run in reverse, had already made the book's next exhibit. In 1922, Hayek's teacher, Ludwig von Mises, predicted that a state which owned everything would fail, not because nobody would work, but because nobody could count. A government that owns the steel mill, the car factory, and the train factory has no prices anywhere in the chain, and so no way to learn whether its steel should become cars or trains. Ask the citizens in a survey, and everyone asks for a Ferrari. Only a price, paid from your own pocket, tells the truth about what you actually want. The century that followed ran Mises' experiment at terrible cost, and it ended the way he said it would, with empty shelves. Nearly every country on Earth learned that lesson, at least for shoes and bread. Markets set almost every price you'll meet today. But Ammous points at the exception, and it's not a small one. In every country, without exception, one price is still set the old way, by a committee, in a room, on a schedule. In America, it's a dozen people around a long table, several times a year. The number they choose is broadcast within minutes to every screen the copper price reached, and the whole world adjusts to it exactly the way it adjusted to the earthquake. One number still moves the planet. This one has a chairman. That price took this whole season to earn. Episode 5 was about the deal between you now and you later. Interest is that deal between strangers. It's what savers are paid for waiting, and what builders pay so they don't have to wait. The price of patience itself. Linda, grown up, is on both sides of it. Her savings earn it. Her shipyard borrows at it. And when a committee pushes that price below what the world's actual patience would set, it sends builders everywhere the same message the copper price sent in reverse. A signal that there's more saved up patience in the vaults than actually exists. One more thing follows, and the book gives it a household image. Money is how everything else is measured, And a committee that moves money's value is a bureau that redefines the meter. Make the meter shorter, and every house in the country is suddenly bigger on paper. Not one gains a single room. The only real change is that the engineers can no longer build. Now the fight. And to see why one side won, you have to see the world through the eyes of the man who led it. Because in the 1930s, the evidence looked like it was all on his side. John Maynard Keynes was the most famous economist alive, and he was staring at a world the textbooks said was impossible. Factories intact, workers wanting work, fields able to grow food. Every physical ingredient of prosperity present and idle at the same time for years on end. His diagnosis: an economy can stall like an engine from fear alone. When confidence breaks, people stop spending. When spending stops, workers are let go. And the newly jobless stop spending too. So the fear feeds itself all the way down. Even thrift turns on you. One family saving harder is prudence. But a whole frightened nation saving at once pulls yet more spending out of the tills, and the engine slows further. It is the head-on opposite of everything Linda's Beach taught, and the collision of those two truths, each real in its own weather, is why this fight has run a century without a knockout. Is cure followed? If ordinary people can't spend and businesses won't, one actor can. Government, hire, build, spend, print, if necessary. Put money into hands that will move it and break the spiral. To those who said the economy rights itself in the long run, he gave the most famous answer in the field's history. In the long run, we are all dead. Economists set themselves too easy a task, he wrote. If in tempestuous seasons all they can say is that when the storm is long past, the ocean will be flat again. Waiting for the ocean to flatten, he argued, was no comfort to the drowning, and millions were in the storm. Keynes offered the people in charge something to do about it. The other blackboard belonged to the Austrians, Mayes and his student Hayek, and their answer began a step earlier. The engine, they said, was broken before the crash, by the committee, years earlier, setting the price of patience too low. The book carries their argument in a parable. A developer wants 100 houses built, at 10,000 bricks apiece, 1,000,000 bricks. A crooked contractor wins the job by promising 120 houses, using only 800,000. For months, everything looks miraculous. 120 foundations, walls rising everywhere. The developer is so delighted with the savings that he buys a yacht. The numbers on paper were wrong the whole time. The bricks in the field were not. One day, the stacks run out, and he owns 120 half houses, worth less than the bricks they stand on. That, say the Austrians, is what cheap credit does to a whole economy. The boom was the lie. The bust is the truth arriving. So the two boards give opposite orders. When the crash comes, Keynes says, spend whatever it takes and stop the spiral. The Austrians say, the cheap credit is how you got here. Let the half-houses fail. Let prices tell the truth again. And the sooner they do, the sooner wheel building resumes. Their exhibit is the crash nobody remembers. 1920, when American output fell as fast as it ever has. The government of the day cut its own budget and did nothing. And, in the Austrians' telling, the whole thing was over in 18 months. The depression that started 9 years later was met with every intervention the era could invent, and lasted a decade. Decades later, a third corner, Milton Friedman's. We read the whole affair and blamed the referee instead. The central bank, he argued, caused the depression, not by doing too much, but too little, letting the money supply collapse when it should have flooded the banks. America's central bank had opened its doors in 1914. Every crash the three corners fight over happened on its watch, and each corner reads that fact its own way. The fight also had later rounds, and they cut both ways. Days before the 1929 crash, the most celebrated economic forecaster in America, Irving Fisher, announced in print that stocks had reached a permanently high plateau. The committee's era began with its best experts unable to see 5 days ahead. But the Austrians collected their own embarrassments. Recovery after recovery arrived under Keynesian management, and the collapse they kept predicting kept not coming. Then the 1970s bent everyone's textbook at once. Inflation and unemployment rising together, which the post-war consensus said could not happen. And the fight, officially settled since the 40s, reopened for good. History, it should be said, hasn't declared a winner. The Depression is the most argued over event in economics. The 1920 story is the Austrians' reading, and not a consensus. And Keynes's corner is where most of the world's economists still stand. The book this series adapts fights from the other one. What's beyond argument is who won the governments. Keynes handed power a diagnosis in which power was the cure, and no government in history has declined a prescription like that. His students built the ministries, wrote the textbooks, and staffed the committees. The Austrians got the exile, unread, unfunded, muttering about bricks, and even a Republican president would one day shrug that we are all Keynesians now. The fight by then was over in every way that showed. The Austrians had spent half a century losing. The ministries, the textbooks, the Nobel committees mostly, the century itself. In 1984, at 85, Hayek gave an interview at the University of Freiburg and summed up his life's cause with the bleakest sentence he ever spoke about it. "We shall never have good money again," he said, "before we take it out of the hands of government." And then the strange part, the part this whole season has been walking toward. "We can't take it violently out of their hands," he said. "All we can do is, by some sly roundabout way, introduce something they can't stop." He died in 1992, 16 years before anyone found the way. Next time, 6 weeks after the biggest bank failure in American history, an email lands on an obscure mailing list from a person who does not exist. It describes a kind of money. You've already seen it in episode 1, standing along the paths of an island, too heavy for anyone to steal. November 1st, 2008. 6 weeks earlier, Lehman Brothers, an investment bank that had stood for over 150 years, had filed the largest bankruptcy in American history and taken the world's confidence down with it. Governments were printing rescue money by the hundreds of billions. And on a small cryptography mailing list, read by maybe a few hundred people, an email arrived from a name no one recognized, Satoshi Nakamoto. It was short. He had been working, he said, on a new electronic cash system, fully peer-to-peer, with no trusted third party. Below that, a link to a 9-page paper. No company, no return address. And to this day, after every kind of search, no one has ever proven who he was. As far as the record goes, the person who sent that email does not exist. What the email described was a kind of money. And you have already met it, standing along the paths of a Pacific island back in episode 1. Too heavy to move, and far too heavy to steal. To see what he actually built, start with why everyone said it couldn't be done. Email a friend a photograph. She receives it, and you still have it. That is what digital means. A copy, every time, endlessly, for free. Wonderful for photographs. Fatal for money. Because if money were just a file, then paying someone would mean sending them a copy and keeping one yourself, and you could spend the same coin 1,000 times before lunch. Physical cash never had that problem. Hand someone a coin, and it is simply gone from you. No referee required. But you cannot hand someone a coin down a phone line, and more of life was being lived down phone lines. So, for as long as there had been computers, every payment that wasn't face-to-face had needed a referee standing in the middle. A bank, a card company, a service like PayPal. Somebody keeping the one true list of who owns what, subtracting from your line when you pay, and adding to hers. It worked, but it meant your money ran through somebody else's building, under somebody else's rules, and you have already seen what the people who keep the list can do. Freeze it, suspend it, print more for themselves. A referee who can stop a payment can be told to stop it by a government, a court, a rule you never read. Every digital dollar you have ever spent moved because someone in the middle allowed it. Clever people had tried to escape this for 30 years, and every attempt had died the same death. With no referee, the digital coins could always be copied. So Nakamoto's problem was the one nobody had solved. Hand someone a digital coin, actually hand it over so you no longer have it, with no referee anywhere in the middle. The answer wasn't new. Humans had solved it once already, out of stone. On Yap, nobody could email a stone either. The wheels weighed more than a truck, and they never moved. When you bought a house with one, no one strained a muscle. You stood up in front of the town, announced that the stone was now the seller's, and the whole village remembered. The village was the ledger. Money was never really the stone. The money was what everyone knew about the stone. Bitcoin is that island we built for a planet. There is no coin, no object anywhere you could photograph or pocket. There is only a ledger, a running list of who owns what, written out in numbers, and divisible down to 100 millionth of a single coin, so it can price a mansion or a stick of gum. On Yap, one village held that list in its shared memory. Here, every computer that joins the network keeps its own full copy, thousands of them, worldwide, checking one another constantly. To pay someone, you don't send a thing. You announce to the whole network that the coins are hers now, and every copy of the ledger on Earth updates at once. No one in the middle. No one whose permission you need. Now look at what that erases. Every story since the gold standard has ended at the same door. The vault. Gold was the hardest money on Earth, but to spend it across any distance, you first had to gather it. Into banks. Into central banks. Into a few dozen guarded rooms, with the key handed to someone you had no choice but to trust. And you saw what the key holders did with it. In 1914, they locked the door. In 1933, they made owning most monetary gold a crime. In 1971, they closed the door to redemption for good, leaving the metal inside and everyone else's paper outside. This money has no vault, no room, no key holder, nowhere to gather it and no one to guard it, because it was never in any one place to begin with. It lives in every copy of the ledger at once. You hold your own coins with a secret only you know, and the whole village confirms they are yours. Nobody can freeze it from a building you have never seen, because there is no building. No official to petition, no border to smuggle it across, no signature standing between a person and their own savings. For the first time, here was hard money you could send down a wire, and never once walk to a vault to do it. But a ledger anyone can hold raises a new danger. If the village is the whole internet, who stops a stranger from simply writing himself rich? Here, Nakamoto borrowed from gold. New coins are not printed. They are mined, and mining costs real work. Around the world, computers race to crack a hard, deliberately pointless puzzle, and the first to solve it earns the right to write the next page of the ledger, plus brand new coins for the effort. To fake the ledger, you would have to outrace every honest machine on Earth at once, burning more money than you could ever hope to steal. Cheating is just expensive honesty, so no one bothers. The book's phrase for it: 100% verification, 0% trust. And now the twist gold never had. Remember what killed the money on Yap? One man, one boat, one crate of dynamite. When O'Keefe made the stones easy to get, the stones died. Gold carries a gentler strain of the same disease. Let its price climb high enough, and in time the world digs more mines. Every money before this one had a boat coming. Some better tool or cheaper way to make more, waiting just offshore. This one has no boat. The network watches how much effort is pouring in, and every couple of weeks it resets the puzzle to stay exactly as hard, so that however many people mine, however much power they burn, the coins still appear on the same slow schedule and not 1 minute faster. Try harder, and you do not get more coins. You get a harder puzzle. The one thing 5,000 years of money could never manage, written now into plain arithmetic. The harder you try to make more, the harder it gets. And there is a number at the end of the road. The trickle halves every 4 years, forever, creeping toward a ceiling it never quite touches. 21 million coins, and never one more. The last of them won't be mined until around the year 2140. A pile the whole world can count, and beside it a trickle that, for the first time in the history of money, does not care in the slightest how badly you want it. For a while it was worth nothing at all. A curiosity passed between a few dozen programmers, mined on home computers, spent on nothing. Then, in October 2009, someone worked out a price. He added up the electricity it took to run the machines that made the coins, divided it out, and sold a batch. 5,050 coins, for $5.02. About a tenth of a cent apiece. The first time anyone anywhere traded real money for these numbers. Not much money, just a few dollars. But the line it crossed was everything. On one side a game, on the other a market. 7 months later, in May 2010, a man in Florida offered 10,000 coins to anyone who would order him dinner. Someone took him up on it. 2 pizzas, $25. It is remembered as the first time this money bought a real thing in the real world. He wasn't really buying dinner. He was proving a point, that these numbers could now reach out into the world and come back with something you could hold. Watch what that is, because it has happened 4 times already. Shells, beads, stones, gold. Everyone began as a curio somebody found pretty or interesting, and only then, slowly, became a way to store what you'd earned and pass it on. The book's claim is that this new money followed the oldest script there is. A thing becomes money not because a king declares it, but because person after person decides to hold it. A collectible among cryptographers, the way a rice stone was a collectible long before it was a fortune, and then one ordinary pizza at a time, money. The first coin Satoshi ever sent, he sent to a man named Hal Finney, a veteran cryptographer, one of the few who bothered to read that email and wrote back that it looked promising. Finney ran the software on his own computer that first week, helping keep the young ledger alive. One of his first public notes about it said almost nothing, just 2 words: running Bitcoin. He died a few years later, his part long since woven into a machine that no longer needed him. Because that was the strangest thing Nakamoto did. In 2010, having built it, he began to step back. A few last messages, the keys handed to whoever would carry it. And sometime in 2011, he simply stopped. No goodbye. The most consequential money since the gold coin, and its own inventor walked away and vanished. And it did not so much as flicker. He had built it so that no one was ever holding the key. Not a chief, not a king, not a banker, not even the man who made it. A money with nobody at the wheel, which the book argues was the entire point. What he left behind, his book calls the hardest money ever invented, and hard for a reason the world had never seen. Gold was hard because of chemistry. You cannot conjure the atoms. This is hard because of arithmetic. You cannot conjure the coins. The search that began on a beach, for something no machine could ever cheapen, ends not at a better metal, but at a rule. But its own author spends the final 2 chapters on everything it cannot do. And the strangest item on that list is the last one. Nobody can change it. Not its enemies, not its inventor. Not even the millions who came to love it. Though, as the next episode opens, they are about to go to war trying. Next time, what Bitcoin can't do. In 2017, the people who loved this money most went to war over it. Not against a government, not against a bank, against each other, and, it turned out, against the thing itself. For 2 years, some of Bitcoin's most prominent early champions, famous developers, the largest mining companies, people who had been there almost from the start, fought to change one setting buried inside it. One number. On its face, the number was a technicality, a limit on how much the network could carry. Underneath, it was everything. It decided whether this money would grow up to be something you spend or something you keep. They had the names, the money, and the machines. And by every ordinary measure of power, they should have won. They failed to make the original network follow them. In bedrooms, offices, and back rooms, ordinary people running their own copies of the ledger kept choosing the old rules. The coalition could publish new software and take its machinery elsewhere. It could not make those ordinary machines accept it. One of Bitcoin's best-known faces gave up, announced to a newspaper that the whole experiment had failed, and sold every coin he owned. The original ledger kept going. This is the last thing the book wants you to understand, and the strangest. The most important money since gold has a short list of things it cannot do. At the top is this: nobody can simply order it to change. The war began, of all things, with a cup of coffee. Try to settle one directly on Bitcoin's base ledger. You tap, and then you wait. Every payment there has to be checked and agreed by computers all over the planet. And they only close the books about once every 10 minutes. So the barista waits. The queue behind you waits. And the fee you pay to jump the line can cost more than the coffee itself. A card network like Visa moves a few thousand payments every second, worldwide. Bitcoin's base ledger moves a handful, fewer than 10. To carry what Visa carries, every computer keeping the ledger would have to swallow a truckload of data every 10 minutes, until only a few giant companies on Earth could afford to keep it. That would hand the whole thing straight back to the powerful middlemen it was built to escape. So here is a money that guards a $3 coffee with the very same machinery it uses to guard a fortune. One writer in the book pictures it perfectly. It is like stationing an entire army around a child's sandbox. Wildly, absurdly overbuilt for the job. That was the war. One side said, fix it. Make the blocks bigger. Let the network carry more. Let it buy coffee. Let it be money that people actually spend. And they had a fair point. The point anyone would make. Money you can't use isn't much good. The other side said, don't you dare. Make it bigger and you make it heavier. And heaviness is the exact thing that kills it. Because a ledger too big for ordinary people to keep is a ledger the giants take back. They fought for 2 years in public, with real venom and real money on both sides. In the end, the original network kept the smaller limit. Faster payment systems have since been built on top of it, but the foundation kept its slower bargain. Ordinary people could still hold the ledger for themselves. It would rather be gold than be Visa. On its base layer, the book's verdict is cheerful and final. Bitcoin is a terrible way to buy a coffee, and it was never going to be a good one. The second thing it can't do, the book says plainly, is hold still. Bitcoin's price swings like almost nothing else a person can buy. Up hard, down hard, on no timetable you could ever plan around. The book's own explanation is almost disarming. The thing is still small. It is a tiny sliver of the world's money, and a tiny sliver gets shoved around by every large buyer and seller who walks through the door. A rowboat on an ocean of ships. And it cannot flex its own supply to calm the water the way a central bank flexes a currency, because its supply cannot flex at all. That is the entire design. The steadiness of the rule is the reason the price lurches. Now, every money swings against something. Even gold, steady as it looks across the centuries, jumps around from one year to the next. The dollar in your pocket has only ever felt still because you count everything else in dollars. Bitcoin just does its swinging young and fast and out in the open. The book thinks this may settle down one day if Bitcoin grows so large that no single buyer can rock it. But it makes no promise. And here is the part that startles people who have only heard the noise. The book warns you, in its own pages, more than once, the value is likely to stay volatile. The whole thing may still fail, and you should never put in a penny you cannot afford to lose. A book famous the world over as the Bitcoiner's Bible spends its own ink telling you to be careful. Whatever else it is not a sales pitch. There is a third thing it can't do. And to see it, you have to watch people try to bottle its magic and sell the bottle empty. When Bitcoin got famous, a single line went around every bank, government, and conference on Earth. The coin itself is a passing fad. but the technology underneath it, the shared ledger, the thing they called the blockchain. That is the real revolution. Keep the clever ledger, drop the unruly coin, and put it to work everywhere. Banking, voting, shipping, land registries, the lot. The physicist Richard Feynman told a story about this kind of thinking. During the war, cargo planes had landed on remote Pacific islands and unloaded undreamed of riches. In his telling, when the war ended and the planes stopped coming, islanders copied what they had watched the ground crews do. Straw runways, fires along both sides, a man in a hut wearing carved wooden sticks like headphones. The visible form was there. The enormous system that made the planes fly was not. Feynman called it a cargo cult. Blockchain, not Bitcoin, is the book's cargo cult. The shared ledger is not a clever database you bolt onto a bank to speed it up. It is slower and clumsier than an ordinary database, on purpose. And the single thing it buys you is that you do not have to trust anyone in the middle. Pull out the coin that rewards honest participation and makes cheating expensive. And the remaining ledger has lost the reason for being so awkward. By the time Ammous wrote in 2018, the gold rush had produced conferences, glossy demonstrations, and very little an ordinary person could use. His verdict was that they had kept the straw runway and left out the planes. So if it can't buy your coffee, won't hold still, and can't be changed, the obvious question is what it is good for at all. The book's answer is that we have had the wrong picture in our heads the whole time. Stop thinking of it as money you spend and start thinking of it as money you keep. Not a better way to pay for things, but a better place to put what you have already earned. Somewhere to hold the value of your work that no one can print more of, and no one can reach in and freeze or take. Digital gold, the book calls it, for a world that had misplaced the real thing. For an ordinary saver, the book's claim is that this changes where the weak point sits. Older systems ended at a vault, a border, or a printing press, someplace where an authority could thin the money, freeze a claim, or make more of it. Bitcoin has no single door to bar and no press to run. Holding it still carries risks, but direct ownership removes one familiar point where someone else can alter the record. And between the big institutions, it can do the old job of gold. Settle the enormous accounts, bank to bank and border to border, the way honest Byzantine gold once settled the medieval world, except this clears in minutes, and no ship full of bullion ever has to leave the room. Not the money in your pocket, and the money behind the money. A moment of honesty. None of this has happened yet. The book is placing a bet, not reporting a result. It is describing a world that might one day arrive, and a great many serious, careful people are certain it never will. Every one of those hopes is a claim about the future, and the future has not voted. Which leads to the strangest thought in the whole book, how you might actually kill this thing. Not with a ban, because it lives everywhere and nowhere at once. Not by outspending its guards, because try that and you only end up paying them better. The book's real answer is a quiet joke with a very sharp edge. There is exactly one clean way to make Bitcoin pointless. The governments of the world could simply go back to money that nobody can print, sound money honestly kept, and then no one anywhere would ever need an escape hatch again. The one sure cure for Bitcoin is the single thing this entire book insists the people in charge will never willingly choose. Which brings all of it back to a small table, and a child, and a single marshmallow. One now or two later. That was the test underneath everything. Yap in Rome in 1914. The fishing boat. The email from a man who did not exist. Every money we have met was really a machine built to answer one small human question. Is it worth the wait? Hard money, money that nobody can cheapen, is the second marshmallow, made spendable. It holds the value of your patience, safe until you come back for it. Money that melts does the opposite. It leans on you softly, every single day, to stop waiting and eat. The book's whole wager, after all of it, comes down to this. When people are genuinely free to choose what to keep their life's work in, and can plainly see the difference between money that holds and money that melts, they will, given enough time, choose the harder money, not because anyone forces them to. Sound Money, the book insists right to its final page, is never imposed on people, is chosen by them. Maybe the book is right about that. Maybe it isn't. The bet is still open. And that is the book, 5,000 Years, from a stone that sank off a Pacific island to a number nobody can order to change. Next in the 100 Books Club, the most famous book ever written about what to do with money once you've saved it. Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor. Thanks for watching.